on the journey so far. It's nice to be on a train where you don't have to worry about anything, where the people do the driving for you. It was great to be driving around Jiaoqing with my brother and my niece and with Jim, but when the car broke down, it certainly was a bit of a saga. We'd seen a few things, we'd done some good filming in the morning, and then the car just doesn't start. And what to do? So anyway, we had to check out, we had to go back there were problems with paying for the hotels. I then had to actually go and get a 10-litre gallon drum of petrol. We didn't have a gallon drum, so we had to go to 3 petrol stations. Now the petrol stations are the far side of town. At this stage the taxi meter is tick, tick, tick. I'm thinking, my God, my budget's blown, you know, what are we going to do? We get back to the car, we don't have anything to put it in the petrol tank, we have to think like Aussies and solve a few things on the spot. So we get the water bottle, we do that, we pour it in. I'm smelling of petrol, my shoes are wearing petrol, I'm thinking, thank God I don't smoke. And anyway, we eventually get the thing started. So then the question is, do we stop and look at the scenery, enjoy the view, or do we just hightail it out of Jiaoqing, like Richie and the Jesuits before, and make our way basically just straight to Guangzhou, get our tickets, and wipe the southern dust from our feet, and head off to Nanchang. Turns out we're heading into another tropical storm, but we'll leave that for tomorrow. Tonight I'm going to get some sleep, enjoy what we've experienced, give it up to God, and say tomorrow's a new day. Ni hao.
Ni hao.
Ni hao.
Ni hao. Ni hao. Okay.
Even though the time in the south at places like Jiaoqing and Shaozhou were difficult for Richie and his companions, it nevertheless afforded them the opportunity to learn Chinese language and culture, and most importantly make a few significant and powerful benefactors, patrons. However, when they arrived in Nanjing, ironically at that time Korea was invaded by Japan, and China thought that the Japanese troops might also invade China. At that time, the Japanese troops, the most feared of the Japanese troops, in a rather strange quirk of history, were Japanese Christian soldiers. These men had been converted by Richie's Jesuit confreres, and here they were invading Korea and making his own movement further north all the more difficult. So they have to leave. Richie and his Chinese Jesuit brother, Zhongming Ren, one of the first Chinese to join the society in 1589, they have to leave Nanjing. And this is like in late 1594, early 1595. And they're fearful, Nanjing's fearful, they've taken on some of that fear themselves. And they hop on the boat travelling south. The tail between their legs, they're a little bit dismayed, a little bit lonely, a little bit upset really. Yet again, another dream just seems to have sailed on by. And anyway, they hop on the boat, it's cold, it's dark, and Richie has a vision. And in this vision, he sees a guy who's standing there, a stranger, standing in the prow of the boat, standing next to him, someone he's never seen. And this stranger turns to him and says, "Hey you, Master Richie,
are you the guy who's actually come here to do away with all our old traditions, our ancient ways, and bring this new message? And Richie's like, who are you? How do you know my true intentions? You know, are you the devil or are you God? And the guy says to him, look, I'm not the devil, I am God. So Richie is like, well, mate, where have you been? It's been 13 really hard yards. I've sprained my ankle, my house has been attacked, I've been shipwrecked, the language is really tough, and the culture's difficult. No one likes us, no one likes my message. Where have you been? And the guy says, Richie, Matteo, Leonardo, go to this big city. And he shows him this vision of a big city. And Richie doesn't know it, so he presumes that it's actually maybe Beijing. And he thinks, great, that's where I want to go, Beijing. The guy says, go to that city, and I will be favourable to you there. Those of us who know Ignatius spirituality, well, we hear the echoes of Ignatius's own story at La Storta, when he has this vision that he goes to Jerusalem. He goes to Rome. He's been in Jerusalem already, and he wants to get to Rome. And he has this vision, and Jesus says to him, go to Rome. I will be favourable to you there. So Richie and Zhongmingren, they come to Nanchang, and where they had been really downhearted, they're now lifted up. Where they had been dismal, they're now joyous. Where they'd been fearful, they're now hope-filled. And they come to Nanchang, and there they have an amazing time of cross-cultural exchange, great friendship, mutual learning. God was favourable to them in Nanchang, and Richie believed that God would be favourable again in Beijing.
Here we are at Jiaojiang, which is along the Zhangjiang, the Yangtze River. It's a very significant port because not only does it connect the east part of the country with the inland western part by the riverway, it also connects the south with the north. People would have come up through the inland rivers like the Gan, gone through Nanchang where we've just been, and then connected a little bit further east of us with the Grand Canal. And that indeed is the way that Richie went up to Beijing. Certainly how he went to Nanjing before he had to go back to Nanchang, and then once he was in Nanjing, a bit further east of here, he would have then taken the Grand Canal. He did take the Grand Canal up to Beijing. We had hoped ourselves to actually catch a boat down this mighty river, the mighty Yangtze, and it would have taken us down that way to Nanjing. But unfortunately, because of the importance of this port and the rise of economic development, the very economic strength of this port has also been its demise, because it is a big export place, but it's now quicker to transport things by the very efficient roadways and trainways. So while there's a lot of traffic on the river, it's no longer tourist traffic. The tourist traffic is much further west, and the only traffic that happens here is sort of intercity transportation of things like coal and sand and gravel and those sort of things, not necessarily the export goods. So sadly, while we had actually hoped to do this and meander and enjoy the sunset, unfortunately it's not actually going to occur. We're going to have to get on a bus, travel about 6-7 hours east, cross the river by one of those mighty bridges, not the one behind us, but one like it, and we'll actually end up in Nanjing and resume Richie's story there.
Nanjing. Although Richie had visited Nanjing in 1595 and again in 1598, he only established the first community here in 1599. he befriended many more scholar officials in Nanjing, including Xu Guangqi, whom he first met in 1599. Ritchie enjoyed the city, attracted by the charms of its scenery and pleased by the welcome he now received. The first Chinese bishop, the Dominican Luo Wenzhao, who was ordained in 1685, was in charge of this diocese. In 1688, he also ordained 3 Chinese Jesuits, Wu Li, also known as Wu Yushan, Lu Yunde, and Wan Qiyuan. They were the first to be ordained in China. Wu Li was a well-known painter, regarded as one of the 6 masters of the early Qing period. He also wrote significant Chinese Christian poetry, among the earliest of its kind. In the 20th century, the church in Nanjing was an important centre of Catholicism, especially when the city became the nation's capital. Thus, the Nanjing community traced their roots back a long way. In the following poem, Wu Li imagines the life of the earliest Nanjing Christians as seen through the eyes of a poor fisherman.
瀑望修都两眼花，涛湖不厌细鱼虾。采仙沉浸君王膳，四体虽老感词卷。撒网长迷水似天。 歌蝉醉榜蛟龙眠，须知白净风之恼，惊变风潮怕秋早。同才改业去于人，文比鱼鱼更苦心。 晚知天许到城府，买于西游守斋户。
We're here outside the Xuanwu Lake Park, and the gate you've just seen was the Xuanwu Mun. Outside that park we have this massive panorama of what the city of Nanjing would have looked like during the Ming Dynasty. Where I'm crouching here now is in fact, and this square rectangle behind me, is actually the old imperial city of the Ming Dynasty. This was where the Ming Palace was situated, and you can see all of the huge number of buildings within this actual palace ground.
A reasonable question is to ask, why did they come to Nanjing anyway, as opposed to maybe going to Suzhou? Or why did they go to Nanchang, as opposed to going to the clay capital, Qingdezhen? And I think there's probably 2 main reasons for this. First of all, they were practicing what has been referred to as an apostolate by radiation, whereby they would meet scholars and they would engage in conversation and be accepted by them. And remember, they're now wearing scholarly clothing, which they donned in 1595. And having been welcomed by the scholars and befriended by them, when these scholar officials were moved to another post elsewhere throughout the empire, often they invited the Jesuits to accompany them. And so they were able to spread out and radiate out through the empire because of these relationships, these friendships they had established. The second reason, I think, is the most important reason. No matter how Chinese the European Jesuits had become, and remember they now had Chinese Jesuits in their number, they were still affected by their understandings they had learnt in Europe. That is, to get things done, it's good if you're near the imperial throne. So just as they had Jesuits working in the courts of France and Portugal and Spain, so too did they think they had to work in the imperial court here in China. And for them, at that time, that meant Beijing. Nanjing, therefore, was an important stepping stone. It was the old imperial city. The Ming had left here in the mid-1400s, but it still had a number of ministries which were quite significant. And so the scholars who were working here were powerful people and with good connections with the imperial court up north in Beijing. Whether or not Ritchie knew these scholars, the scholars knew him, the wise man from the West. They knew him either personally, and that's possible because of the number of people he had met in his time, or they knew him because of his writings. In 1595, he'd written a very influential book on friendship, which he had written in Nanchang. He wrote a book about memory learning and memory techniques, the famous Memory Palace, and his world map that he had produced all those years ago in Zhaoqing had been reproduced many a time. It had even been pirated, such that this wise man from the West was well known to scholar officials. Thus, while they were happy to be here and to work here and to go out and meet scholars and continue their apostolate of conversation and radiation, Ritchie certainly still always had his eye on moving further north to Beijing. By being here, he hoped that they could indeed get to that imperial throne.
Beautiful Hangzhou. Hangzhou was a very important city for the early Chinese Catholic community, and particularly for the Jesuits in their midst. It was a place that they trained their men, it was a place where they printed books, and in times of difficulty and persecution, the Chinese Catholic community provided a safe haven for the European Jesuits.
Father Paul, thank you for having us in your church. Can you please tell us something about this church here, the Church of the Immaculate Conception?
You are welcome to the church, because I'm very happy to come here to visit my church. This church is very old. It was built 1559 and built by Jesuits. Then my fellow